Hello, welcome to Maya 101. This is Michael. In this first official video of the playlist after the introduction, we're going to be talking just about basic fundamentals of Maya, and we're treating this class again as if you have never used Maya before. So first of all, you open up Maya and here's what you see typically, a screen like this. Now if you don't see a screen like this, it might look something different. What I'd like you to do first of all, foremost, is go up here to the Workspaces. Right, your top right corner, you should see this Workspace drop-down menu. You'll see mine is set to Maya Classic. If yours is set to something else, I recommend choosing Maya Classic, because if you do have it set to something else, like say animation for example, you'll notice that the screen gets configured in a drastically different way. So let me go back to Maya Classic. Okay, so here's where we are with Maya Classic. So that's number one. I'm going to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as how the workspaces are all laid out. Number two, you might also still have at the bottom here a couple other UI elements that show like the animation controls, the timeline, and so on. We're not going to get into animation right away. That's something that we need to get a few things under our belt first before we start diving into that. So I tend to remove that. Maya Classic should remove that for you just to get you more screen space. But in case it doesn't, let's go ahead and go up to Windows, UI Elements. You'll notice here I have time slider and range slider both unchecked. So we'll go ahead and, if they are checked, uncheck them now. That's fine. We'll get back to them at a different time after we've gone through some more content here. So time slider and range slider we're going to turn off for now. Another thing I like to do in my classroom before we really get started is make sure we have a few settings turned on. So let's go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and then we'll go to Preferences. So again, Windows, Settings, Preferences, Preferences. In case you haven't noticed, I am expecting you to kind of follow along with me when I do these things. So here's the Preferences window. We have all kinds of things. We don't have to worry about any of this stuff except for just a couple things. We're going to go down here to the category on the far left, what's called Undo. Undo. Undoing is important. And so we want to make sure that Undo, first of all, is on, and that the Q is set to infinite. I believe the defaults, at least it used to be, the default undo was set to finite and 50. So you can only undo up to 50 times, and then it wouldn't save it anymore. But especially when we're first getting started, I would say let's make that infinite. We can go back as far back as we want to. That's pretty important. Make sure that's set to that, and let's hit save. Okay, so now that we've got those couple of kind of background things set, that we're all here looking at the same thing hopefully, let's kind of go around the room a little bit and kind of see what all these windows are. So first of all, the big blue one in the middle, right? At least mine's blue. It's kind of blue to gray gradient. This is the viewport or the workspace. This is where primarily everything is going to be seen. If you seen any of my other videos on my channel, you'll notice a lot of stuff happening in here most of the time. So this is the viewport where we make things and see things and view things. This is where all this kind of happens. We'll get back to this in a moment. If you go to the left side here, this is the outliner. The outliner says so here in this tab. The outliner is essentially a list of everything in your scene. And this is going to be very helpful when you're first getting started to kind of see how things change and interact as you create things. You'll see them start popping up over here on the left side. On the right side here, this main window here is called the channel box. If yours looks something different, you might have a different tab over here selected on the right side. This is the channel box layer editor tab. You'll see that if I click that tab, it'll collapse down. We have these other tabs as well. But the channel box tab, this is what we're going to be looking at the most as we kind of get started here. Layer editor is down here at the bottom. We'll again talk about that later. At the top, we have our list of menus along the top here. File, make a new scene, save your scene, that kind of thing. Very common stuff. Edit, create, select, and all these different menus along the top. We're going to kind of talk about these. You'll notice if you are new to my channel, most of my videos are focusing on one specific menu item at a time. Then below that here, this is the status line. And lots of things in here, but the main things I wanted to point you at is over here on this side, we have these buttons here for the new, open, and save. Saving your scene is very important. Make sure you save often with this little old-fashioned floppy disk icon. Again, also we want to make sure that we're all in the same menu set. So the modeling menu set is the default. You should all see this, but if you notice all these different menus, if I change this drop-down menu to something else, these menus will change as well. So it's important that we're all in the same modeling menu set with this drop-down menu here. Again, just to make sure we're all looking at the same thing, really. Then we have the shelf. That's what these line of icons are right here. They all have the different tabs here for the shelf as well. All these little icons correspond with a different menu item. So just as an example, this one here looks like an orange box with some white edges, or white edges here. This is the bevel command, or the bevel button. If we go under Edit Mesh, you'll notice here bevel. Same command here, same icon, just a little smaller right there. And that's just what this is. These little shortcuts to different elements within the menus. They're very like most commonly used, you could say. At the very bottom of the screen, we have these two lines here. First of all, we have this one labeled MEL, M-E-L. This one we're probably never going to touch. To be honest, I've been doing this for 20 years. I very rarely use MEL. That's kind of a shortcoming on my side at this point. I probably should be better at MEL at this point. But MEL is a kind of a programming language. It's called Maya something language. I can't remember what the E stands for off the top of my head right now. But essentially, it's you can type in scripts and things once you know how, and it'll do magic using MEL coding. To the right of that is this line here. This line is kind of a general behind-the-scenes kind of messaging, kind of displays, there you go, displays the command response, there you go, from the script editor. So anything that happens within Maya, if you get a response from Maya, like in the background in the code, it'll kind of display it there. Just for example, if I create a sphere, down there it says result, a sphere. That's essentially what this is saying. Result, P-sphere 1, polysphere 1. These were created. By clicking that button, I got a result, this sphere. So that kind of stuff you can typically ignore, okay? However, this line, if it does pop up and it's yellow, a yellow result pops up down there, that's to get your attention. That's why the color is yellow. And that yellow means warning, okay? So warning, something you did is causing this warning message. Now, warning does not necessarily mean something's wrong. It could simply be saying, hey, just in case, this might be important, all right? And so when you see the yellow message pop up, you can look down there and look and kind of read it, see what it says. And I would say most of the time, in my case anyway, most of the time I know about what it's saying, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I understand. Thank you for the warning, but I'm going to go ahead and do this anyway. That's usually what happens with a warning, but it's good to, when you're first getting started, to look down at the warning, see what it's trying to tell you. Now, if you get a red message or pops up red color, that means error. Something went wrong. Like whatever it was that you were trying to do, it didn't work. And here's why, or hopefully it'll tell you why. Anyway, it pops up a red message though when something failed to get a good result. So that's where I keep that open just in case I ever need to. I go ahead and hit the delete key, remove that sphere for now. So below that here, you'll notice this line here, little green question mark, and you'll notice here is displays short help tips for tools and selections. So this will actually change what it says based on what you're mousing over. You look down there in the bottom left, you can kind of see it change as I mouse over buttons on the shelf and so on. And it's giving you descriptions and titles and so on of what all these little buttons do. If I go to the Edit Mesh menu and kind of go down here, it does the same thing. It kind of gives you little messages and descriptions of what all these little buttons do. So it's very handy, especially in the beginning, to kind of glance down there and look and see what it says. It also might give you some help tips. Like for example, if I go to Surfaces Square, just as an example, and look down there in the bottom left, it doesn't just say square, it says select 3 or 4 curves, isoparms, or trim edges. So it's giving me a kind of almost directions on how to use this. I first have to select 3 or 4 of these things. And the order of selection is important, it says in parentheses. So a little message there just to give you a little bit of a warning and say, hey, this thing, you need to do this. So sometimes it'll do that. Most of the time it'll just kind of tell you, hey, this is lock length. And down there it says lock the distance between CVs on a selected curve. So it just kind of gives you a description of what it does. So very handy, especially here in the beginning if you've never used Maya before or not sure what these buttons do. Okay, so in general, that's a brief rundown through the user interface going around the viewport here in the center. Now the viewport itself also has its own menu items, and we'll get to these a little bit later. But I would, if I want you to go here, I'll usually say go to the view menu attached to your viewport, as opposed to trying to find that same menu up here, because this won't be there. Okay, so just keep that in mind. There's these little menus here as well as this kind of mini status line here as well, just for that viewport. And each viewport has its own little mini status line and mini menus. Okay, all right, so let's kind of dive in here. So we're talking about Maya. This is a 3D application. 3D meaning three dimensions, right? Which is different than 2 dimensions or 2D. So 2D, like a drawing, like on a piece of paper, or a picture, or a photograph, or even like if you think of a cartoon, like a 2D cartoon, like not as much these days, but if you think about Bugs Bunny and things back and when I was your age, that kind of stuff. 2D images, you have your height up and down, and your width left and right. Now what distinguishes 3D is the third dimension, which is the in and out, coming towards you and away from you. That's the depth. So we have height, width, and depth. Down here in the lower left corner, you'll see this little red, green, and blue little icon down here. And it's small, but this is essentially displaying the directions that you're looking at in your scene. So let's talk about how to rotate and maneuver your camera view within a scene. So number one, on your keyboard, you're going to click and hold the Alt key, or on a Mac, it might be called Option. Alt key, and then on your mouse, left click and drag. And so by holding the Alt key, left clicking and dragging, you're going to actually rotate your camera. So viewing your 3D scene from different angles. Now if you have a typical mouse, you have a left click and you also have a right click. So again, holding down the Alt key first, then I'll right click and drag, and now I get kind of a dolly in and dolly out. It's not a zoom in so much, but it's moving your camera closer and further away. So I might say zoom. Technically it's more of a dolly, but you're pushing your camera in and pulling it out by holding down the Alt key, right mouse click and drag. So click down on hold on the right mouse button and drag left and right. Left mouse button, drag left and right, or rotate up and down, so on. Now if you have 3 buttons on your mouse, you have a middle mouse button. If you don't, you might have a scroll wheel, and most scroll wheels these days can be clicked on. You'll feel it kind of click down when you push down on the scroll wheel. Now I'm not scrolling. Scrolling will zoom in and out like this. However, I find it much more difficult to control than simply doing the right mouse button and actually controlling it this way. If you scroll wheel up and down, it's going to really drastically change your view, and it's, in my opinion, very difficult to control. So I don't typically recommend scrolling the wheel, but I do want to say Alt click and then middle click down on the scroll wheel or the middle mouse button if you have one, and pan left and right and drag around, and that's going to pan your camera. Move it to the left and right, move it up and down like so. So again, holding down the Alt key throughout, left mouse button rotates, middle mouse button pans, right mouse button zooms in and out, or dollies in and out. And eventually, as you do this more and more often, you'll become really, really accustomed to this. It'll be second nature to you. Again, make sure you're holding down the Alt key. Now, if you hold down the Alt key, and as you're clicking and dragging with your left mouse button, if you let go of the Alt key, you'll notice I can still, you can't see my hands, but I let go of the Alt key, but I'm still holding down that left mouse button. I can still rotate until I let it go. And now I can't do it again. I have to click down on the Alt key again first. Then I can say right click and zoom. I can let go of the Alt key at this point as long as my mouse button is still held down. Okay, it's a little bit of a tidbit there. All right, so now we can maneuver around our 3D scene. Let's start putting something in it. So we can create something. So if I go here to the Create menu at the very top of the menu items, Create. We're going to be focusing on primarily at first polygon primitives. There's lots of stuff here, obviously. You can see all kinds of things. But we're going to be focusing first on polygon primitives. Then we have lots of primitives we can choose from. And just to keep things simple, I'm going to start with a sphere. Feel free to make anything you want. You can choose any item from this if you would like to. But a sphere, there we go. I have a sphere in my scene now. So now that I have a sphere, you'll notice over here on the right side, the channel box becomes active. There's things in the channel box. If I click off an empty space and I don't have anything selected, the channel box is empty. So whatever you have selected, that will display in the channel box that object's channels. You'll also notice on the left side in the outliner, we have a new item here, P Sphere 1, has been created and added to the scene, therefore gets added to our list of items. And you can actually click it here in the outliner to select that item. You can also click off an empty space to deselect. So P Sphere 1, I can select it over here. I can select it here in the scene as well to select the P Sphere 1. Speaking of selection, I did kind of skip over the toolbox over here to the far left side. We have a couple of items here to look at. The first one, this looks like a cursor. That is simply a select tool. It actually tells you if you mouse over it. Select tool. These two here, this is the lasso tool, this is the paint selection tool. These two selection tools are in the toolbox. I kind of wish they were at the bottom because whenever I'm explaining these, I always have to kind of say, all right, we're going to skip these for now because I don't really use them very often, to be honest. It's something that's kind of very specific as far as when you would use these, and it doesn't come up very often, especially in the beginning. So typically I tell my class, you know what, we're going to skip these for now. We'll talk about these later. Essentially a lasso tool, you can lasso and select items in your scene with that. Paint selection tool, you can paint and select components that way. Again, we haven't talked about components at all, so this is very confusing. If you have done this and you find yourself in this state where you no longer are able to select your entire sphere or whatever you have and it's all just these little dots, I would like you to right click and hold. You'll notice this menu will come up. We're going to go to object mode. Object mode. That brings us back to this. Again, don't be confused by that, but again, what I would say is skip these two selection tools for now. So we have our select tool at the top, which is important. Skip these two, and then we have the most important ones, move, rotate, scale. So the move tool, the rotate tool, and the scale tool, these three here. And you'll notice as I click on them, the gizmo that appears on my object changes. By the way, if this gizmo is too big or small, you can use your plus and minus keys to change the scale of your gizmo. I'll make it one step bigger just to make it easier to see in the video, hopefully. So, move tool. As it says on the 10, it moves objects. So I can click on these arrows and move my sphere around in 3D space. You can see here I have these kind of squares in the corners of the move tool. This lets me move in two directions at once. That can be handy as well. You can also click in the center and move in all three directions at the same time. I don't recommend doing that very often because usually you want to be relatively precise in how you move things around. So, but keep that in mind, you can click there in the center and move things around. To undo, just simply press the Z key. You don't have to do Control Z or Shift Z or anything like that. Just Z, 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 Z is undoing my movements back till I get to the center point here. This center point, by the way, is called the origin of the scene. You can kind of tell where the center is by the grid that we see here. We have darker lines going through the middle of the grid, and where those two darker lines intersect, that is the origin of the scene. That's where it's considered 0, 0, 0 in XYZ coordinate space. It's right there at the origin. Okay, then we have rotate. Same idea. You can rotate on these circles that surround this gizmo. And scale. Instead of arrows at the end of these lines, we have little boxes. We can scale our object along these directions. Again, these let you scale in more than one direction at once with these little square handles, like so. Again, Z will undo. I can go back to the original state. Now the shortcut keys I want to tell you right here off the get-go to kind of access these tools quickly, because it's kind of a pain to move over here, click on rotate, move back over here, rotate whatever I want to do, move back over here, and move it over here. So going back and forth is kind of cumbersome, and while it may only take a second, that's a lot of seconds as they add up over time. So the shortcut keys are Q, W, E, and R. Q, W, E, R. Those first four letters at the top left of your keyboard, as long as it's a standard English keyboard. Q is select, W is move, E is rotate, R is scale. You would think R would be rotate, but it's not. R is scale. Q, W, E, R. Kind of goes down the list in that way. So really quickly, you can press W, move your tool, E, rotate your object, R, scale it down, W again, move it over here. really quickly go back and forth between these tools. Again, Q is just select tool. There's no gizmo with the select tool. It just allows you to select things. Okay, so sorry I missed that part, but back to the channel box. Okay, so now I have this sphere or whatever it is that you have selected. The channel box becomes active. So we have all these things in it. So what are channels? Channels are not like channels on a TV. You're not looking for, HBO or ESPN or whatever. Channels go with each of these objects here on the line. Translate X, translate Z, rotate Y, scale X, scale Z. And these all correspond with the direction and one of these tools that we've just talked about. Move is translate, by the way, is the same thing as move, so don't get too confused. Translate X, Y, and Z is move, X, Y, and Z essentially. They use the technical term translate. Rotate X, Y, and Z, scale X, Y, and Z. Then we have visibility as well. So these are all the default channels that are displayed here for a sphere in the channel box. So just like we could use the tool to move something, I can click and drag on this arrow. You'll notice over here as I click and drag on the Translate Z handle, the Translate Z channel changes the value. So the value of the Translate Z has changed. And you see as I mouse this back and forth and drag it around, that value is changing. I can do a different one. This one. All these values will change if I rotate or scale. So as I really just mess around with this shape, everything gets all cattywampus over here. I have all these different values and all these different channels. So very quickly though, if I wanted to say, I want to move this sphere 5 units up, press 5 and translate X in this case. Hit enter, and it's going to move it exactly 5 to the right in the translate X. We'll go 5 and translate Y, which goes up. And let's say when 0 translate Z. So now it's right there on this line, 5 units over here to the right of the origin and 5 units up. I want to say, so I want to take a rotations all to 0. You notice how I click and drag. I can drag and select multiple inputs at once on this channel box. I can also click and drag and select them here like this. But I'm going to click and drag here and down and type 0, enter. All 3 becomes 0. So rotate X, Y, and Z all gets back to their default rotation of 0. And then for scale, the default for scale is 1. So I select all 3, press 1, enter. It goes back to the default scale of a sphere. And then again, if I go back to 0, 0, 0, 0, type in zeros for all the translates, it goes back to the origin of the scene. So you can really quickly type numbers in here. I want to go 4 this way, and say 8 that way, and 2 that way. Where'd it go? There it is, up in the air. Went 8 up, and rotated 2. There we go. All right, so hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. There's lots of ways you can manipulate your objects. So you can move them precisely with numbers. You can move them, very minutely with your hand using the tools here, the gizmo on the object itself. Okay, so that's move tools or modifying your object's position with these commands: move, scale, and rotate. So what I recommend doing is just to kind of get the hang of navigating a scene and placing objects. Okay, a couple little things that help you along the way. If you want to make, say, I'm going to delete this. Well, first of all, you press delete to delete things and select them and delete them. Create polygon cube, for example. Let's say I want to make a brick wall. I'll make my gizmo a little smaller now. This is what I'm used to. So I can scale it to kind of make a brick shape, right? Because bricks are typically kind of like this shape. I can move it, place it wherever I want to place it. And if I want to make a brick wall, does that mean I need to make another cube and scale it the same way and so on? No, you can press Control D. That will duplicate your cube. Look over here in the outliner. You see now I have P cube 1 and P cube 2. So P cube 2 is a duplicate of P cube 1, and it's been created right on top of where P cube 1 is. So I move it up. You'll see there I have a second cube selected. So with the second cube, I can say position it. Most brick walls kind of have a off-center or offset brick. Control D, make a new brick down here. Control D, I can just make like a line of bricks, for example. Control D, Control D. And then let's say I can hold Shift and select more than one thing. So again, I'm holding the Shift key, I'm adding to my selection by clicking on different objects. And then I can Control D all of these, and I can move them up together. See that? So you can, once you get the hang of some of these fundamental commands, you can do things much quicker. Grab all of these by dragging a box around all these different cubes. Control D, move them up all together. And you'll notice my outline is becoming full of cubes really quickly by making a brick wall. Let's grab all these, Control D. Control D again. So really quickly I can kind of put together this brick pattern. So here you have all these different cubes, right? So we'll talk about how to organize this a little bit better in future videos. We'll skip that for now. Just again, this first video is kind of introducing you to creating objects, placing them in your scene, and just kind of using them almost like Legos and kind of placing them around. So I'm never going to give you homework, okay? I have taught classes for a long time, and I would give homework each class, just little things I'd like my students to do and work on. I'm going to tell you what I would call homework, though, is to practice maneuvering around your Maya scene with your camera controls. Again, holding down the Alt or Option key, left mouse button, middle mouse button, right mouse button to rotate your camera, pan your camera, and zoom your camera respectively, and then creating and placing polygon primitive shapes to create something. Create a little scene is what I would recommend. Or even if you want to create, simple shapes and objects for representing certain things. So, for example, let's say you can create like a room in your house, or even try to create all your rooms in your house. It's kind of like a video game or something. You can create polygon primitives. Let's say I have a circular table. So I'm going to go to cylinder. So here's my cylinder shape, right? And my circular table needs to be a short cylinder, but then it needs to be wider like this. There's my tabletop. And then all the legs of the table, right? I can create another cube or another cylinder even if I want to make round legs. Do a cube. So this cube would be kind of a thin, tall cube. I'm going to scale it like this. And I can Control D to make new legs, placing them around my table. Kind of like that. Now one thing, again, this is a really simple example. Just another thing to show you though. This is the view that we're looking at here with everything kind of looks gray, right? This is our shaded view where all these different polygonal objects are shaded. They kind of have this kind of shadowing, shaded look to them. If you need to, if it's hard to see, like if I can't see the table legs very easily, I can press the 4 key, the number 4 on the keyboard. That enters wireframe view. So I can see through things and see things like this. I can click and drag. And so now I can look at it from the top and say, oh wow, my legs are really off center. I can kind of select certain things and kind of move these legs around to maybe get this looking a little bit more organized, right? That kind of thing. So the 4 key, 4 is wireframe. 5 is that original shaded view. So 4 and 5, those are the main things we're looking at first. And then, so Control D again is duplicating things. So it's really easy to kind of create copies of things and move them around. And the last thing I want to tell you about before we kind of close for this first 101 video is how to name something. So instead of this being called P cylinder 1 and P cube 61, because I have so many cubes in my scene, I can name things. And it's important to name things eventually as you get closer to getting a job, especially because whenever you're working in a work environment, you got to name your stuff. Really important to do that. But so for the cylinder, I can call this, instead of being P cylinder 1, if I click up here in the channel box, just click the name, I can change it. So I can call this, say, tabletop, for example. Tabletop. Or I can call this, brick, or call this leg, or table leg 1, table leg 2, table leg 3, that kind of thing. Just by clicking up here in the channel box. Also, in the outliner, if I double click, I can rename things here too. So I can call this table leg 1, and hit enter to rename that object itself. Okay, so you can rename things, scale things, rotate things, position your objects, going through, again, I recommend exploring these primitive shapes and kind of getting clever with it and making things. In our next video for 101, we're going to talk about how to actually manipulate these different primitives to create something more custom. So it's not just cubes and cylinders and spheres and so on. So definitely have fun playing with these building blocks and kind of getting accustomed to the idea of placing things and rotating your camera around. The undo key, the Z key, make sure you understand how that works too. And just kind of have fun with it and play with it. That's really how you get started learning this kind of thing. So hopefully this first video was a fun introduction to Maya 101 here at the Maya Toolbelt. My name is Michael, and I hope you have a good time.